Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on our 100th episode of Blowback Exposing Imperial Decline. So this is a milestone episode, and we are experiencing a little bit of adversity with Ben Toth on assignment, unable to join us. We do have our regular co-host Ian Kummer from a suburb in Moscow, Carlo Parcelli from Washington, D.C., and special guest, Vladimir Golstein. He is a professor of, and I always butcher this, is it Slavic Studies or Russian Literature? Slavic Studies?
Slavic Studies.
At Brown University. And he is on vacation in the south of France, and he has graciously made some time for us. But his voice is a little bit under the weather. And if you know what his normal voice is, that means it's really bad. So we're gonna try and muddle through this adversity. We entitled our program "Regime Change Venezuela Edition." So first thing we wanted to discuss was the recent elections in Venezuela, where Sunday Nicolas Maduro won an electoral victory, 51% against 44% by the opposition, the U.S.-backed opposition, and it really seems that there was a build up to that election, and the Western press was for months just claiming that all the polls showed a 70% landslide victory for the opposition party. And even during the election day, there was some exit polling being circulated in the Western press stating the same thing, that the opposition was winning in a landslide. 70% of the vote was going to them. And then when the vote was announced, 51-44, of course, everybody's saying it was illegitimate. And now there's, some violent protests, some violent street protests. And so, in my opinion, just a typical regime change operation by the West. Dust James, a good friend of the show, is a little unhappy with our title. Could be more positive. We need to talk about how we need to defend and support democracy in Venezuela. And of course, I couldn't agree more. Our title was kind of geared more towards the liberals who are thinking in their minds that it's Maduro who is the anti-democratic election thief, when in reality what's going on is just more shenanigans from the West, as we would expect. And don't believe anything the Western press says, of course. That is absolutely correct. But any thoughts, Vladimir, on were you watching the elections at all? Were you keeping up, or are you enjoying the beaches and the food and the mountains?
I didn't watch it with attention. So I would say its scenario is obvious. A Western press casts him as another socialist tyrant, but people on the ground view him differently. And when it comes down to what he provides for certain securities and so on, versus neoliberal, neoconservatives' destruction of the country, eventually people came back to their senses and said, we don't want it.
Yeah, so I mean, we sound like we're in agreement that the Chavez legacy is popular. It's not overwhelmingly popular, but it has a strong base of the poor and the disenfranchised who have been historically, just marginalized and impoverished in this very wealthy country of Venezuela by the ruling class, by the elites. And so they know that. And now that they have a taste of democracy and they have a government that they think is really on their side, they're not just gonna, give it up without a fight. And so I am very certain that these electoral outcomes are authentic, right? That he has a majority of support. And it's definitely a large minority that wants to go back to how things were, but it's not enough to win an election. And the U.S. knows that. And so they're up to this effort, this anti-democratic effort. to bring people to the streets and try and topple the government that way. Carlo?
Yeah. Uh, what's concerning to me is that the plurality that Maduro won this time is less than the pluralities that have been won in the past, which simply means that U.S. sanctions are working in Venezuela, that they're chipping away at the socialist program, because there's a lot of immigration away from them. I saw crowds in Spain, which are of course wealthy emigres that have left Venezuela, went to the streets. I see it. I see it. Just the sanctions have eroded people. The coups. I think they're meaningful in Venezuela, and with Guaido, that was an embarrassing episode. But still, there seems to be erosion. Another thing that concerns me is this whole notion. This jibes with Trump, that if we win, the elections were fair. If we lose, they were rigged. So, and that's the context in which they're taking place, not only in Venezuela, but in the United States. It's a new plot. It's a new way of going about it that appears to be against all common sense, very real and substantive. I mean, how many? You have 800 international people down there looking at the voting arrangements that call it perfect, a perfect election. It was like, this is like the third time in a row that 800 people who go down of all stripes have basically not been able to substantively criticize the election process.
Yeah.
Yet still, you get criticism from the Western press and the opposition down there, and violence too.
Before we move on too much, I wanted to focus on the first point you were making about siege socialism and about how a sanction and economic attacks is the standard playbook for the West when a socialist government comes to power. And we've seen this throughout history. It continues in Cuba, it continues against North Korea. And even when it's not a socialist government, a directly socialist government, but when it's a revolutionary government that overthrows the regime that's allied with the US, like in Iran, then the response is always to try and suffocate and destroy that society and try and, just really bring poverty and misery to the people so they'll be unhappy with their government. And I think, and that's why this struggle for multipolarism is so important, because the US for the last 75 years has had the power as the superpower, as the unilateral superpower, to cause so much pain all around the world on these societies that want sovereignty. And so as multipolarism develops, the US's ability to do that will get less and less. So we're really hoping to see, a world where the US can't just, immiserate people like they try to do in Cuba, like they try to do in North Korea, like they're trying to do in Venezuela, a very, very wealthy country. Vladimir, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree, but I would draw an analogy with maybe Syria.
Yeah.
That is, it's not economic analogy. I'm not sure Syria is like socialist country, but when United States says, "Oh, tyrannical regime, it's going to fall down. We're just going to send army there and Syria will collapse." Not so fast, because a majority of the people actually support Assad. So when they come up and with this portray the leader of the country as a tyrant, as a bad guy, and all the opposition are just united, and the country and this tyrant does have support, this is like baloney. yes, in some countries there, I can imagine there is a tyrant who suppresses everyone. But I would look at with big attention to a lot of countries and say, are you sure you're pointing at Syria, not at yourself or something like that? So that's a whole paradox. So there is, the people have popular support. It doesn't mean that it's ideal government, but definitely it appeals to people and answers certain needs. And this pro-Western, pro kind of American opposition shouldn't be trusted because, we know that with their shock therapy and other things, they very frequently bring destruction to the countries, not improvement.
Yeah, and the fact that these governments that are under siege and that have the economic aggression against them, and even the military aggression with the what is it, the tolerant rebels, or what were they called, the good rebels in Syria, like, I mean, and to think that even after all that, the people still support their government, it's amazing. And I mean, even in Venezuela, they're being impoverished and they still support the government. Imagine how much support for their government they would have if the U.S. just left them alone and didn't try and make them miserable. Then these governments would be even more. And then imagine one more step. Imagine that the U.S. actually tries to help them, gives them aid, development, and support, and facilitates their development as a society, like we do with Israel. Like, imagine if we did with what we do with Israel, with North Korea, or with Iran. Like, I mean, then these governments would be amazingly popular because the quality of life would be so much better, and people would be, have access to so many more things which they don't have access due to the embargo and the sanctions and stuff like that. But it just shows you that once, the West is the problem in this. And, so I think, again, multipolarism is something that I think will be tremendously beneficial for humanity once the United States no longer has the ability to just cause this pain and misery in every society that they want to subvert. Right, Carlo?
Well, I would add an analogy for a sec.
Okay.
Sure.
Let's look at France. They have this popular front, right wing, Marie Le Pen. They, on the popular level, they keep on winning here, keep on winning there. Then through manipulation of their sort of political system and others, Macron keeps on staying in power, split them. So had it been happening somewhere with Russia or Putin, Americans will be all against, corrupt government manipulates popular vote. In France, nothing. Great victory for liberal voices. Right wing is how, a lot of people you talk to, they actually support them. So people support them. People hate Macron and his inhumane attitude to others, and yet he stays in power. And yet the United States never writes anything of that nature the way they write about other countries.
You're suggesting there's hypocrisy, and I am not sure I'm going to agree. Of course. Ian?
Yeah.
Well, I would say the issue is, like Carlos said, it's a sanctions regime is erosive over time. And whatever that catalyst for the sanctions was, whether it was a revolution or just a government coming into power that the U.S. bloc doesn't approve of, eventually younger voters will just not remember that. Like, for example, Iran. Anyone under, 50 at this point isn't really going to remember the revolution or the Shah or any of that. So they're just like, well, okay, things are miserable. And it's the government's fault because that's kind of the go-to person to blame for poverty and things not being as good as they could be. So that's the erosive and the PR effect of sanctions. And the thing about, and as everybody in the show knows, I'm a huge enthusiast for democracy. I love democracy. It's the greatest system ever. The problem with democracy, with elections, is that the foreign-backed opposition only needs to win once. It's like what that message the IRA made to Margaret Thatcher after they tried and failed to assassinate her. You have to win every time. We only need to win once. It's kind of the same thing here. The U.S.-backed opposition only needs to win once. So it's just this Russian roulette every single time you have an election that they'll manage to take power that time. So you just have to do this every 4 years or however often you have an election cycle. So
that's why they're making such a big push right now in Venezuela, because they got, Maduro's going to have a 6-year term. So that's a long time. And so that's why they're really doing their best to, to overthrow him and take power. But I don't think it's going to be effective in Venezuela. I think Maduro, the first comments he made was, "We've seen this game before. We know how to deal with it." And so I'm quite confident that, this regime change effort in Venezuela is going to fail. But I mean, you're absolutely right that, they'll get another shot at it. And I mean, they don't even have to wait 6 years, right? Like they can try and assassinate him. I mean, there's a million things that Western imperialism can do to put pressure and to try and overthrow, those governments. But,
well, if you look at even at Ukraine is kind of the classic example, or what they tried to do in Georgia and what they're trying to do now in Venezuela, the opposition doesn't even need to win the election. They can try to basically get the results of the election annulled, essentially, and cause that person to flee, which they tried to do in Belarus, and they've tried to do basically every election and every vote, and what they succeeded in doing in Ukraine. If you can get popular unrest, if you can trigger popular unrest and the government fails to contain it, it can just keep spreading and spreading and spreading until it becomes an insurmountable problem.
Yeah. And that's definitely the hope in Venezuela. They're hoping for a successful Maidan,
Plus, it's likely that Venezuela would join BRICS in a few months, and I think they wanted to put the skids on that. The other thing is I'm not sure that Chavez and Chavismo went far enough. They let a majority of the media, a majority of the elite class continue to operate within their society. And these people had no goodwill. They had no goodwill and no interest in the people. People prattle on about how Venezuela was the wealthiest country in South America at the time, before Chavismo. Well, that was true, but 75% of the people lived in poverty, and the other 25% of the people exploited them mercilessly. And that, I think, obviously, in this day and age, you couldn't go the Castro route. You couldn't go, look, these guys are not on our side. They're going to be against us forever. So he took 200 of them out and shot them, and that was the end of that resistance. And that's endured. That revolution has endured with the vilest sanctions one could imagine, so inhumane as to be almost incomprehensibly. I mean, you couldn't consider human beings doing that to other human beings. Maybe some form of animal that lived on the planet that would do that. Some kind of reptilian monster would do that to other human beings. But they persisted. And they're constantly reminded that if they go back, for them, it's just going to be enslavement, and the bulk of the people that worked against them are going to be killed. So
you referenced Castro executing 200 people, and that was true at the end of the revolution. There was some summary execution. Well, actually, it wasn't they weren't summarily executed. There was some very quick court hearings before they were sentenced to death. But those people were, the perpetrators of gross human rights violations and things like that. Well, anyway, go ahead, Vladimir.
I would say, I would add, yes, there is Western machinations. Yes, there are nasty sanctions. Yes, there is domestic corruption. But, I grew up in the Soviet Union, and I've heard all these complaints about evil NATO and interference and this and that, but it doesn't leave, the actual rulers, free of charge. That is, they need to do their best as well to conquer corruption. Corruption really comes from inside. So, in other words, people who live in these countries, they don't deal with America. They don't deal with this. They go to their little office and say, I need my apartment fixed. And some corrupt official says, well, I need some money to get you fixed, or whatever. So, as much as I sympathize with Maduro and with the situation in Cuba, I've heard enough stories who say that sometimes these guys are not on up and up. And that's where the opposition, and that's where the United States put the wedge in. They're looking for this. So in other words, I want Maduro to succeed because he is on the right track of history, I believe. But you don't get there by practicing corruption, ignoring interests of people and so on. So you don't leave an opening to this 25% corrupt bastards who say, oh, life was better under us. You don't leave an opening to American propagandists, because and that's what's happened very interestingly with Belarus, because their leader actually takes care of the people. There is like 5% of obnoxious idiots in Minsk, but the rest of the people are doing well, and they know that. So that's kind of, I think a lot of people have to learn a lot from Lukashenko. He's an interesting guy.
No, I didn't realize that was his MO, that he has done a good job of putting down corruption. And obviously, corruption is a problem under any economic system, under any political economic system. It's something that is a problem. And definitely the West can use it as a way to get in and convince the people that, the West could do better. But hopefully the people are smart enough to realize that, corruption is even worse, with under oligarchy, right? Oligarchy is the most corrupt form. And so, to whatever extent a socialist government has corruption, it needs to be dealt with. So, and obviously in China too, corruption was a very big problem. And Xi identified that as a problem. And he's been taking some serious measures to get corruption under control. And he's had some success. Inequality has actually gone down, and he's gotten corruption under control to a bit. But it's something that we as a species really need to get better at understanding, how to deal with this corruption thing, because it's not gonna leave us. Even if every government goes socialist, it's still going to be with us, and it's something we have to figure out and overcome.
A good example will be Ukraine. They were not happy with the kind of sort of Russian connections, corruption under this kind of regime of Yanukovych, who was sympathetic with Russia. Now they got 10 times worse. People who are wealthy, they pay their bribes. They go to Poland, they go to Germany. Poor people who have nothing to gain from this regime, their children sent to be killed into this kind of meat grinder. It's corruption from the beginning to end. While every place I go, I see, I talk to people who are these yachts are. Oh, these are like Ukrainian oligarchs. Their countrymen are being killed, and they are just everywhere.
What do they call them, Carlo?
I'm trying to.
They're like the
battalion, the Monaco Battalion.
Monaco Battalion, yeah.
Yes.
Multi-billion-dollar yachts.
Well, the thing is too, and that's a good point, because what Vladimir was saying is that there are legitimate problems with these governments. So it's not that's illegitimate to oppose them, to say, hey, there's problems that this government is not fixing. The problem is that, that's a hairline fracture in that political system that foreign influence can capitalize on and exasperate until it breaks. You can see that in Russia, to when Putin replaced Yeltsin and cleaned up a lot of corruption. But you can still see even now, there's still layers and layers of corruption. And then this war was a catalyst for cracking down on the remaining corruption. You can still see there's a lot, with the Crocus City Hall shooting, they cracked down on corruption in the migration police. With the reconstruction efforts, like in Mariupol, there were several people so far arrested for corruption, just stealing funds that were meant to rebuild. So those recent events have been a catalyst for cracking down on more corruption. But you can see that if you're a person who has bad roads, who is trying to get, say, a permit to do something with his house, and he can't because of corruption. You're supposed to bribe, with a lot of those, especially with more lower income. And the problem is that it's not an easy problem to solve, because one of the easiest solutions to reducing government corruption is to just pay everyone properly. If you're making a decent wage as a policeman or as a bureaucrat somewhere, you're less tempted to take bribes. So if everybody's getting paid crap, they're going to supplement their income in some way. And so the government can't just simply say, "Oh, we're going to get rid of corruption. Corruption is bad. There's no corruption allowed." That by itself is not a solution.
Well, it is difficult. It's a difficult problem.
What we discovered on this program, basically through our libertarian friends, who are very naive about good and evil in the world. Of course, if you read Dostoevsky, that disabuses you of your simple notions of the world. And we use Western taxonomies to look for answers. And so we have the political dimension to fight corruption, the economic dimension to fight corruption. But there's also one far more complex. And that's the psychological dimension to fight corruption. Just who will become corrupt, and deciding which people in a culture and what kind of experience will require they become corrupt. Like with the economic, there are people who generally wouldn't become corrupt because if they had access to enough of the necessities of life.
Yeah.
So that's a dimension too. I'm not qualified to address that with any kind of deep understanding, but I think it's something necessary to consider, how people become corrupt and why.
Yeah. And you mentioned psychological, but I mean, it's cultural too, like a culture of corruption. How do you turn a culture of corruption into a culture of, law abiding and doing the right thing? It can't be easy. And then I want to point out corruption is just one axis that the imperialists are good at, getting into and causing a split within a society. So corruption, but there's also, religious differences, language differences, cultural differences. I mean, the West is just really, really good at identifying, cracks in any society and exploiting those cracks for all they were. And corruption is definitely one of them, but there's a lot of other ones too. And again, that's something that as a species, we have to recognize these tendencies and do our best to make sure that, the West isn't successful at doing that, but it's easier said than done.
Yeah.
I would say where the West succeeds is targeting like key individuals, and kind of corrupting them in their particular way. In like say in Russia, in backward regimes, corruption means bribes. I still kind of totally fascinated how Americans during the Cold War and after, how they managed to seduce all the ruling classes, all the elites of France, of Germany, and got them to dance to this NATO tune. Because, for a while, Germans were so much against the wars in Europe, against this and that. Now all of a sudden they just all jump into this kind of American tune against Russia, against this and that. Why? Because, Americans didn't bribe, some kind of, Hans or Jürgen here and there. They bribed, elites inviting them to teach at the universities, inviting them, giving them fellowships. And then all of a sudden, these elites are writing in a particular way and convince Germany that, well, it's America actually won the war. and America was fighting against Nazis and communism and Stalin and this. And all of a sudden, Brits and French think that America liberated the world. And sort of, and that's a sophisticated corruption based on propaganda, on targeting particular people who matters. That's what they do in Russia with, today's elite and intellectuals who just they give them grants, and this guy sort of keep on writing particular angle, and that's sort of skillful corruption.
Plus, to get back to Venezuela, with both Chavez and Maduro were accused of drug smuggling. Now, it was through their military. Now, there may have been some drug smuggling on the part of the generals in Venezuela, but I'm fairly certain that neither Maduro or Chavez had any goddamn thing to do with it, and may or may not have had the power to end it because of the situation the U.S. had put him in, that had weakened him to a large extent, that would put his life in danger if he went after these drug smugglers. And I wouldn't have put it past the CIA to be behind the drug smugglers, just as the rush to be behind the drug smuggling in Honduras when they ran Zelaya out and that sort of thing. That's what the CIA does, but they use it rhetorically too. They use this notion of corruption, the U.S., the CIA, as a
pretext, as a justification.
Yeah, rhetorical weapon. It gets very, very complicated, and with your liberal friends, Billy Bob, it's very, very effective.
Oh yeah,
they're idiots.
No, they're true believers in the Western press. Anything they say, they're gonna accept as gospel. But I wanted to focus on what Vladimir was saying. I mean, it's just such an interesting, approach to imperialism. How the West kind of does a global brain drain, brings people here, indoctrinates them, and then puts them out in power in these other areas. I mean, that's just a definite phenomenon that is intrinsic to how the West has been able to maintain their global empire, for almost 75 years. And again, that's one of the things we need to understand, appreciate, recognize, and come up against somehow. We have to get people in power in other countries that are truly interested in benefiting their own societies, as opposed to just putting in the policies that benefit, the Western corporations. But there was a great book on that by who was that one guy, the economic hitman, by what's his name?
Questions of an economic hitman.
Yeah.
Well, I want to touch on what Vladimir was saying about how much Europeans got on board. He was talking about, after the Cold War, or during and after the Cold War. But I want to comment on, there was a shift like that recently too. Europeans were not completely on board with the whole, I'd say the latest revisal to the New World Order, if you will, after 9/11, Bush wanted to invade Iraq. They wanted to invade and occupy 7 different countries. And there were a lot of European countries Britain, of course, Tony Blair, of course, was totally on board with it, but France, notably, Spain, notably, Germany kind of wasn't into it either. And now, there was a lot, and they would pretty openly complain about, they didn't actually oppose it in any meaningful way, but they would complain loudly about the USA being too aggressive. They would pretty openly say that. Now look at the dialogue now. No one really says that. I actually see them justifying it.
With regards with Iraq, there wasn't any benefit for France in that one. But I think with Ukraine, I think all of Western Europe was promised the spoils of Ukraine and Russia. It's like, hey, you guys get on board with this because there's going to be a big payout for all of you. So they were on board. But with Iraq, there wasn't really a payout for Germany or France. And so they were happy to, oppose it on nationalist interests and saying, hey, that's an illiberal thing you're doing. That's not a liberal thing. And we're liberals. But then, of course, if there's something in it for the liberals, like they get to divide up the natural gas that is in Russia after we overthrow Russia and put in our puppet government, well, they're all for that. And they thought they could do it too, I think. Would you agree with that, Ian, or would you?
Yes, well, I would say there's a psychological and cultural level to it too. I mean, Europeans do a really good job of pretending they have this whole pan-European project going on and they're all just one big happy family. But I think if you really look at them for more than 5 seconds, you really see they hate these different tribes of Europeans hate each other just as much as they did 100 or 200 years ago. I mean, I don't look at, the French, if you split Europe into those quadrants like Western Europe, Northern Europe, Eastern Europe, Central Europe, Southern Europe, I don't see love and affection. They just they put those differences aside against common enemies. So I'd say Russia is that common enemy that gets them off each other's throats for a few seconds too. And they don't mind being subservient to the USA if the USA presents itself as a leader against a common enemy. I think that's what's happened here. It's actually a feudalist. I'd even say it's some sort of neo-feudalist mindset. You don't like bending the knee to someone, but you'll bend the knee to someone if he promises to take care of the common enemy.
Would you be in agreement that there's a class dynamic to what you're describing, where it's the ruling capitalist classes, the wealthy elites of these countries that are willing to put their differences aside in order to go after a shared enemy who represents a threat to their specifically, their class interests, to their share of, political power, their share of the wealth. So socialism definitely seems like it represented a threat to that. And I think just, a good nationalist, strong government also represents a threat to these oligarchs. And I think the oligarchs in Ukraine saw what Putin did to the oligarchs in Russia, and they said, fuck no, we don't want that in our country. But okay, you were about to say something.
Yeah. So, you asked me a question, so I could answer the question for you, or you could answer it yourself. But
I'll just keep answering then. Ian.
Right. But I would say yes and no. So there is, I guess you could even call it a cosmopolitan class versus globalist class. I would say it's not new either. Like how aristocracies would see rapport with each other, or even if you could look at like the Dumas novel, Three Musketeers, you see those guys get along with their English counterparts. No one they're literally conspiring against their own government to not embarrass the queen, right? And they're literally conspiring with the enemy, but no one saw it as like treason. It's like, they had the, in their mindset, that class oriented mindset, they didn't see any problem with that. So I think there's something like that going on today. I think French and British and German and American elites see more rapport with each other than with their own citizens. I think it's gotten a little more extreme since then. I would say these people actually hate their own citizens. I mean, I look at the Kamala Harris crowd, I look at the Macron crowd, and I see, hatred. They hate the average Frenchman. They hate that average white rural American. They literally hate them and want to hurt them. I think that's fairly new. But there is also there's other things, I don't want to oversimplify either. There are other things. There's deep tribal and cultural motivations going on here. There's that. I mean, even the Orthodox and Catholic and Protestant split is still playing people off against each other, up to the present day, even when religiosity is much lower than it was. So I don't know did that answer your question?
Kind of. And I have follow-ups, but let's get...
Well, Vladimir looks like he wants to say something.
Yeah, I would add, not about this good book, not just Perkins about economic hitman, but there was an amazing book, Naomi Klein. It's called Shock Therapy. She studied what had been done in Chile under Pinochet, and then what was done, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, and she sees the same pattern. This particular sort of economic groups, they restructure society, restructure economics. So particular elites in each country benefits from this restructuring, while like bankers, organize things, others organize things, while common workers, factories have been closed. This is such and such being kind of closed, people kicked out, whether they are being hated by these elites or not, I don't know, but they're just being ignored. So let's restructure. So all these economists, they were very active, including this one of the very active force there was this Jeffrey Sachs, who's now at Columbia, who now actually has a turn of heart because he kind of learned and realized he was there at the helm. He saw what he was doing, but he's obviously a man of integrity, and he sort of now looks at things differently. But that was done in Chile, in Russia, in Poland, and many other countries. In some countries, the benefits were enough to spread around. So I think Poland, with all the Western help and others, they're actually doing all right. But other countries, Bulgaria feels much worse. Russia, that's what Putin had to stop because they were so corrupt. They've closed all they destroyed their military, practically destroyed it. They destroyed, a lot of industries just because these new groups of, this symbolic economy, money, computers, internet, these guys benefited. So these elites in every country, France, Germany, Russia, they kind of, like Jan says, they are together, they understand. What happening, and I think that's happening in right wing in France, and there are certain movements in Austria and Germany, is this right wing actually represent not just people, but maybe native local industries which don't want to be restructured and destroyed. They don't want to buy things from IKEA or from the big corporations. They want to have like local businesses. And I think that's what shock therapy does. They destroy these mom and pop shops, destroy mom and pop, artisans who work for so long. They put these big stupid corporations who produce shitty products all over the world, but cheap. So I think that's what sort of it's a struggle. But I think because U.S. appeals to these elites, that what Naomi Klein very well registered, people in power with connection with government, they respond to that and they organize public opinion. And a lot of people unemployed are suffering, drinking, committing suicides. In Bulgaria, there regularly people set themselves on fire. Who cares? Let them be.
You brought up Jeffrey Sachs, and of course, Jeffrey Sachs defends his legacy, and he says he was really pushing hard to give Russia the economic support that the West gave to Poland. And he says he was shocked and angered when the decision was made not to give Russia the big economic support, and I think probably billions of dollars in direct foreign aid that was given to Poland to help stabilize things was denied to Russia. But no, Sachs, he was just a naive liberal because he was a true believer in liberalism, and he was a true believer in the promises that the U.S. was making to the Soviet Union, that we're going to have peace. If you break up your empire and break up the Union, there will be peace with mutual prosperity, through mutual prosperity. And it was just a tactic by the West of conquest. It was a strategy for conquest. And and I think people like Sachs were dupes. They were the foolish the foolish believers that went along with it and were participated in it and didn't realize what it really was. And they were true believers in the lies of liberalism. But so what was the other thing you were saying about the
like attention among sort of capitalist class, if you
right? No, exactly. And so the global finance, the big finance against the industrial elites. That's one way of it. And then you got the petite bourgeoisie, like you were saying, the family businesses. And so it is very difficult for the ruling class to align all these different factions within their, capitalist class to get them on the same page. And they have to choose winners and losers. And it's typically the banksters, the big finance people who have the power and call the shots. And sometimes the industrialists and the smaller business people are going to rebel against that. That's kind of what we're seeing with Trump and the United States to a certain extent.
I wanted to address one of the comments in the
put it up.
Comments. There's a couple of comments here. So one, I want to bring up this idea, that right-wing super patriots also hates the people. Well, no, I'm sorry. I mean, that's very popular now, and I would say it's popular on both sides. Like if you say something bad about one side, like some people feel obligated to say, well, the other side is just as bad. Well, not sometimes, yes, sometimes, but it's not automatically true. And I would say the reason this statement that, right-wing nationalist guys also hate the people. Well, no. I mean, I'm going to bring up this other comment. So this Yasha mentioned this. She saw, I don't know if that's a he or a she. I'm sorry. Saw a video from Belarus, an unattended self-serve store on the side of the road. That's a high trust society that you can just put stuff out on the side of the road and be confident that it's not going to get broken and stolen. And the reason I say why globalists, thank you, Yasha. I just wasn't sure. I apologize. But globalists actually hate the people because they want to, with this combination of what I call forced equilibrium with more impoverished neighbors, just breaking down society itself. So you can't even put, in the USA now, you can't even do that. It just gets robbed. It looks like American cities look like a war zone, literally. I can't look at that and say that's not coming from a place of hatred. They actually do hate us. So that was my thoughts.
Look, I mean, what you're doing is you're describing class struggle, right? And you're describing how the elites are interested in keeping the people exploitable and disenfranchised from the political system. That's what their interest is, and that's how they operate, and that explains their behavior. They don't want to empower the people; they want to keep them exploitable, and they want to exploit them. Now, in the imperial core, of course, they have to placate them. They have to offer them a better quality of life than they offer the exploited, people that live in the exploited colonies. But for the people in the exploited colonies, the gloves are off. They can exploit them to the fullest extent. And we see that in the misery and poverty in Central America, South America, Africa, Asia. And that's the behavior that the world is resisting and waking up to, and they're saying no to. But I just think you're describing, go ahead.
I see what you're saying, but no. I think that's Capital Volume 1 type situation that Marx described has existed. But I think what we're saying now is new because, it's true. You'd have a ruling class that would cause that country to stagnate because they're taking too much and they're stubborn to change. They're hurting the collective good by prioritizing themselves and their own well-being and profit. That's true. That I differentiate that from this idea, from this transnational group that's actually destroying. I mean, I think that's because, no nationalist is going to deliberately destroy his own nation, right? That's a contradictory. I mean, he might be too greedy and he might harm them by putting himself and his own profits and his own family's profits over them. But this actual globalist movement, we're going to actually dismantle nations. Like the French people, the French nation, we're actually going to dismantle it. So it's just destroyed. Like France is not even France anymore. And do that and rinse and repeat with every country. Make Poland no longer Poland. Make Belarus no longer Belarus. Make the USA no longer the USA. Just dismantle the social cohesion, I think is new. I think that's
I would just say that I want you to be more specific, because you talk about nationalism and a nationalist agenda. And the thing is, under capitalism, there's no such thing as one nationalism. So there's the nationalism of the ownership class, of the wealthy elites, and there's a national policy that benefits the interests of the ownership class. But that's different than the nationalist interests of the working class masses. And so in any society, there's not one thing called nationalism. There's two different approaches to what is in the best interest of the country. And they are opposite. They're oppositional. And so the nationalists in Germany right now, if they're interested in the national interest of the wealthy elites and the ownership class, they're getting on board with imperialism. And they don't want to allow the global empire that is of, by, and for the global wealthy elites to collapse, to be displaced by China, to be displaced by actual nationalists like in Russia. I don't know.
It's interesting because we don't have Leo on this time, but I'd be interested in asking him, because I've heard that the ethnic differences in China are actually more extreme than what you would see in Europe, and so that's why you have this thing with the Uyghurs and the Free Tibet thing. They're trying to find those hairline fractures between different groups of people and turn them on each other and just basically balkanize, like Yugoslavia. That's when you bring up what do you mean by destroying nations, that's what I mean. You have a larger state of different groups of people that for the most part get along, and then dismantle it. And I brought up this idea of transhumanism before, that you have, that what, especially in the particular, I would say it was centered in the United States, the way Democrats really appealed to the billionaire class, the capitalist class, if you will, more so than Republicans, is because Republicans were boring. They were just like, you ask every Republican, what do you want if you come into power? They say, well, I want to cut taxes. That's boring. It's just, they want to, I think these people have more of an appetite for that. Democrats, to say they give this transhumanist nation that, that humanity itself is putty in your hands. If you're a Bill Gates or in his class of people, you can mold and restructure.
No, that's definitely an effort. See, we've given Vladimir a long time to rest his voice, but Carlo looks like he's itching to get in.
Yeah, I disagree with several points that Ian's made, but let's go all the way back to the point of super patriots. I mean, they do hate the majority of Americans. They hate America the way it's set up now. They hate women. They hate minorities. They do. Believe me.
I don't think they hate
and they do. Listen, you guys minimize the influence of Bannon. I'm having trouble with first name.
Okay, let me ask you a question, Carlo. Let me ask you a question. Do you think Hitler hated the German people? I mean, I'm not saying was Hitler good or bad, but do you think he's like, I hate Germans, and he wanted to hurt Germans? Do you think that
he hated Jews?
He hated a lot of people, yes. They didn't hate Germany.
He hated, the list is long. The list is very long. And he killed 6 million people. What I'm trying to say is, yes, the super patriots. Listen, Bannon's phrase is a white. Get that, guys? Our color. What we are. A white Christian. Get that, guys? Christian. Not Jewish, not Islamic.
I would be surprised if he ever said that out loud.
And that's the nation. And he's doing a great job.
He's too politically savvy to say that out loud. I don't think he ever said that out loud.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
So.
Rosalie, back me up here.
Yeah, he said it many times.
Many times. White Christian nation.
Okay. I could be wrong. It just sounds like something that he's way too savvy to say out loud. But
I'll he says that because he's confident. He has a Supreme Court now. He has the ninnies from January 6th. He's got these people, and that's their agenda. When they get into power, and they've already done this, they're doing it. They want to do away with Medicare. You know, if they did away with my Medicare, end of show for me, I'd be dead. I'd be a dead man in a couple of weeks.
A lot of diversity on this panel, Vladimir. What are your thoughts?
Fascinating argument. I don't know. I would agree with you that probably in arguments like that, class issues are very important. That is, if we need to see economically where a person coming from and what exactly whose interest he represents. I don't, people might embrace the flag and say that I'm pro Germany or pro America. It doesn't mean anything. I mean, if they exclude and destroy certain amount of people or ignore certain amount of people, they're not for anything good. They are for the money classes. So I would say in each situation we have to sort of consider who is behind, what are the interests. Are we bringing people in a meaningful way? Poor and rich, are we making sure that they all have like access to jobs and to their, or we're just creating all this division between whites and non-whites, between transgender and gender, between gays and straights. And I think that's where I think capitalism and imperialism, succeeds. They do an amazing job in splitting us rather than bringing us together. And, I that's fine to have different arguments, but I think it's a little bit academic to argue who is more patriotic, right wing or left wing. I think if you care about poor people in your neighborhood, in your thing, you're a good guy. If you don't, you can embrace yourself in all the rainbow flags. You can promote all whatever. You're good for nothing.
Well, that's why I want to bring up. Like, I have a friend he's from Australia actually, and before he came to Russia with his family, he visited. He mentioned he was in the Baltic states first. And he's like, yeah, if you go around Latvia, you'll see more rainbow flags and Ukraine flags than Latvian flags. Like, you barely see Latvian flags. But so that's what I mean about, I don't even mean globalism in the classical sense. Like when Putin says he likes international institutions, he would like international courts and international banking agreements. He would like all of those things. So in the classical sense, Putin himself is a globalist. And when we talk about globalism, we mean this idea of we're actually erasing nation states and replacing them with this transnational entity where there's only loyalty to that transnational entity. And that's what differentiates this from, yes, obviously these far right guys can do a lot of harm. They can kill a lot of people. They can find declare these groups of people's internal enemies and do a lot of harm to their people. But it's not, because I think that's what distinguishes like Ursula. I think she does wake up every day. I think she does seriously wake up. How can I undermine Germany today? I think that's really on her mind. It makes her happy when she sees Germany being undermined and by this global.
So can we agree, maybe not, that globalism is just a way to say imperialism, and we've just known it as imperialism, and right now the only imperialism that really exists is Western imperialism, and it's headquartered in the United States, but it's got all these very powerful vassals, and that's what the Transatlantic Alliance is, and that's what NATO is. It's these Western countries that are working to further the interests of the wealthy elites, particularly the Western wealthy elites, the financial elites, the banksters, and to a lesser extent, certain, industrialists, and it's the billionaire class, and that's who the empire serves, and they're not interested in allowing governments they don't control, like the Communist Party of China, or Putin's government or the Iranian government or Maduro. They're not interested in allowing these people to exist because ultimately they can't control them, and they can't control the resources. More importantly, all the tremendous resources that are in Russia, in Venezuela, the tremendous manufacturing capability that's in China. You know, the West wants to control that, and they definitely don't want to be displaced by it. They don't want these powers to overcome them and become more powerful on the global stage. So, I mean, that's what is going on, and how, you know, how the West responds to these powers getting stronger and displacing them is what we're seeing play out in real time, I think.
Well, I would say what differentiates, I'll be quick, I'm sorry. I think what differentiates, because classic, typical imperialism does imply a winner and loser. So, you know, the British Empire was the British people exploiting the Indian people, African people for their own benefit. So the British people the English specifically did prosper and benefit from that empire of exploitation. Yeah. But when I look at modern, you know, I look at NATO, I look at even just this international rules-based order, as they love to call themselves. I say, well, there's no nation of people that actually benefits, because the American people, God knows the American people don't benefit from it. The British people don't, French people don't. No one actually in the imperial core except this globalist class of billionaires. They're the only winners. There's no nation states that actually benefits from this. It's actually, I would say it's almost worse to be in the empire than outside the empire.
But that's not a contradiction to what I'm saying, right? I don't hear it as a contradiction.
Well, it's not benefiting. Well, I mean, because the British are sitting without heat, and several thousand of them die every year because they don't have heat. So we can't really say the British people are benefiting from this.
Well, are they living a better life than the people in Haiti? Are they better off than the people in Haiti? So, I mean, everything's relative. It's all relative. But yeah, no, ultimately, the policies of Britain are the policies that benefit the British elites. The policies of the United States are the policies that benefit the elites. That's definitely true. But as part of that policy, the elites know that they've got to placate to a certain extent their own citizenry. They can't just treat their citizenry like they treat the exploited countries like in Haiti or Guatemala. You know, they can't give us those because they know we wouldn't tolerate it and we wouldn't support them. So they have to bribe us to a certain extent, whereas they don't feel that need to bribe the Haitians or the Guatemalans or, you know, people in Burma.
And you know, this comment here, yes, it is worse to be in the empire than outside. It is better to be in Russia or China right now than to be in the USA. If you're a working class person.
Because those are powerful countries. I think what he's saying is he's asking in the exploited periphery, like those countries that have been vassalized. China has not been vassalized. Russia has not been vassalized. So he's talking about those countries that, you know, are subordinate to.
I would say it's relative to yourself. Like so I would say agree. Yes, it is relative, but it's relative to a hypothetical version of yourself. So would a British or an American person be better if NATO did not exist? And if NATO was a classic imperial structure, then the answer would be no. They would be worse off because they wouldn't be able to exploit anyone. But I think it's actually the opposite. If Britain and the USA were not in NATO, those people would be better off because they wouldn't be sucking their economies dry to enrich the ruling class in Ukraine and Taiwan and these other. That's what I'm saying. So that's what differentiates it.
I think you have a point. Yeah.
Let me just interject one brief anecdote. Look, there's this guy. Gordon Liffer or something. Anyway, he's a Democratic flack and a comedian. And he goes out and he interviews WABA people. I mean, Trump people. And I feel like Ian kind of leans toward Trump. And so he asked one question recently to these people. Who do you prefer, Biden or Putin? And of course, everybody preferred Putin. So, and then he asked them why. And they didn't have any coherent answers. Not one, none. could answered with the Maidan coup. Not one had the Minsk Accords in his mind. Not one of them had the fucking Istanbul Accord in their mind. Not one of them knew anything about the Donbass, nor mentioned it. None of them. All they mentioned were these stupid Biden. He's really a doddering old man, and I like or something like that.
They want somebody that's strong. They want a strong leader.
He didn't make any. They didn't make any coherent sense. Now maybe they edited out those MAGA people that actually knew, but the ones they had on the show knew nothing. Knew fucking nothing. So
what about Vladimir? Can you speak to this? I mean, I would call it the uselessness in saying is the Republicans better than Democrats or the Democrats better than Republicans? Like, I mean, is the left's culture better than the right culture? Like, to me, I want to kind of avoid that whole discussion because it's pointless.
That's not the discussion.
Okay.
I mean, if that's the discussion, then you just chalk it up to media control. At the level of media, those MAGA people are controlled. That's what they get from Fox News.
What do you think, Vladimir?
I would say something important. We started with this sort of global, say, American driven imperialist elite having shock therapies and controlling, different countries like Chile, Poland, this and that. And here's a paradox. Let's go back where we started with Venezuela. U.S. feels very well the weakness. So if Maduro's corruption allows some opening and bring opposition, they will do it. The same thing, people who are opposed to this kind of maybe American-dominated imperialism very frequently are nationalists. They are nationalists. But this nationalists shouldn't open the door to American elite to manipulate them. Even when the nationalists start saying that only whites and let's get rid or whatever, they just destroy themselves. So I understand where Jan is coming from. The nationalists should say, I want my people have job, have this. I don't want bankers from Washington come over and destroy it. But this is a legitimate argument. But if they start arguing, I don't want Arabs, Jews, blah, 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 they just undermine themselves. And that's precisely where this global things, they come in and they just, like Macron, that's what he's doing in France again and again. Oh, you want this way, racist, blah, blah, blah. And he stays in power doing a Washington agenda. That's what happens.
So can you repeat that? So Macron is stoking identity politics and racial divisions in order to stay in power, essentially, is what you're saying.
Yeah. And creating this boogeyman in this popular front who has probably concerns of people, in outskirts outside of Paris. There was Gilets Jaunes movement who were like complaining about taxes on gasoline, whatever he was doing. People are against Macron sort of raising pensioner age. He just ignores it. He does whatever sort of this global thing is, but they managed to succeed. They immediately defang any kind of nationalist movement because
once again,
nationalists, unfortunately, like you said,
once again, this is not an either-or situation. It's a neither. Macron is stupid and evil, and very short, like me. And but we know what Macron is. But what would Le Pen do? Oh my God! They're both wrong. Two wrongs make two wrongs in this case. That's all you got. You got to go against it all, baby. You can't make these, Le Pen, Trump. Fuck Trump. He's just like the Venezuelan elite.
Vladimir, is Trump going to beat Kamala? What do you see happening in November?
Oh fuck! I don't give a fuck. It's going to be bad. Look at. Let me do this is the greatest distinction I can make. If Kamala Harris is elected president, U.S. international policy will be just as rotten as it is now, and maybe worse. If Donald Trump is elected president, the domestic policy and the harm done to all sorts of people in this country will, in his country, in the United States, will be egregious. It will be a hellhole for them, and it even includes women now. So that and there's your choices, and I don't think Trump, frankly, will do anything to lessen the heinousness of U.S.'s international policy.
Vladimir,
I don't think. Let me finish. And I don't think the Democrats will do anything in particular to protect people who are going to be harmed by the Trump policies. They'll be mostly rhetoric. There will be some changes. Obviously during the last Biden administration, there were some changes that benefited people, including me. So
I know
personally,
one of our guests mentioned that certain statistics, certain data points among people of color under Trump improved, but I don't really want to have that discussion. I wanted to talk to Vladimir about Trump possibly becoming the next president, and then his policy vis-a-vis Israel, because it seems like Israel is kind of angry at the Democrats. They're unhappy with the level of support and rhetoric that the Democrats are giving them. And it seems to me there's a very strong possibility that they are hoping that Trump will go to war with Iran on Israel's behalf, because right now it seems like the Democrats are against doing that. And the big hope of Israel is to get Trump in power, and then that they can leverage him either willingly or unwillingly into a conflict with Iran that is going to save Israel. Because right now it kind of appears to me that that's the only thing that Israel can do to maintain its viability. But what are your thoughts? Because I know you have thoughts.
All right, and that will be my final thoughts, because my voice is just sort of. So to your question, I think Trump will win. There is enough anger in this country and United States against this kind of democratic business as usual. I agree with Carlo. It doesn't mean that domestically there will be much of the improvement. I don't think it will. In terms of foreign policy, he is unfortunately totally unknown. He will be supportive of Israel for sure. He promises at the same time, to stop somehow the war between Russia and Ukraine. He promises to threaten China. How much leverage he would have? Will he work with State Department with this? Because he promises everything. But what is clear from my observation of, Israeli society for a long time, always more sympathetic with Republicans. They think that Democrats are leaning toward Arab nations, toward Palestinians, while Republicans are much more for them. So Israel is absolutely certain. Russia is not quite certain, because they know that Trump is unknown entity. He might stop war, or he might bomb Russia just to show that how cool he is. I really don't know what he's doing. But in terms of Israel, but I would add, it doesn't follow that he'll go to war with Iran. He probably will use the clout. He would probably try to negotiate one way or another from which he would appear. But I don't think he will be supporting Israel. He will probably try to negotiate something, but I don't think he will go to the war. That's kind of my reading of that, So, but, domestically, I wouldn't have high hopes. And for foreign policy, there will be certain realignments, definitely more support for Israel, but definitely more hostility to China. But other than that, it remains to be seen.
Vladimir, we really appreciate your time. Sounds like you are having a great vacation, and for you to take a break and join us is greatly appreciated. So I know you got to run.
Thank you.
I think we're gonna wrap it up to here, unless you guys want to continue. Ian or Carlo,
I did have a couple closing thoughts.
Okay,
I don't want to keep Vladimir on. Yes,
I'm going to drop you off, Vladimir. Thank you.
Thank you, Vladimir. Yes, I just want to address maybe a couple of things. So I do actually disagree with Vladimir. I mean, we'll see who's right in November. I mean, I don't want to say I'll eat my hat because that would be a bad omen. I don't want to actually go on the show and eat my hat. But I will just say I will be astonished, most astonished in my life if Trump wins in November. I mean, it's just I'll be astonished. I mean,
Ian, do you think there was an element within the Secret Service or deep state that tried to assassinate him? Do you think it was a lone gunman, or do you think they were helping?
Well, I stand by my previous statements on the previous show. It could have been either, and there's not enough.
Okay. But I mean, because if you thought that, then there's really no chance that they're going to let him be the president if they're actually trying to kill him.
I don't think they need to assassinate him though either. They can just have him not win. Yeah. So that's what dissuades me again. I mean,
I think it's an internal power struggle within the capitalist class. And I think there's some very powerful factions backing Trump, wanting him to win. And I think a lot of those factions are the Israel lobby, the pro-Zionist lobby, Christian Zionists, the Republicans.
I think if there's an element supporting him, I think it's most likely originating from the Israeli sector. That even Biden, with his unconditional support for Israel, has been getting cold feet lately, and they're axing him. That might have even been a reason for him not running. It's possible. I mean, I don't know if you saw that Seymour Hersh article.
Yeah.
That Obama basically outright said it was Obama who basically personally threatened Biden that he would arrange for.
I remember you asking Ian, he's not going to drop out. I'm like, dude, they're going to make him. He doesn't have agency. Like
What made me astonished about it was that they did it so late. So yeah, I will admit I was surprised because they were just going to run him. So there's a reason. And I don't think it's because he's senile, because we've known he's senile since before he even ran the first freaking time, for God's sake. So there's some reason.
You still think that the factions backing the Democrats are stronger and control the apparatus and ultimately will make sure Trump does not get in.
Yes,
over the contrary wishes of AIPAC. And
we don't know. We can't be sure. I mean, AIPAC might just be betting on both horses. I mean, they always know. But I do want to say though, I mean, as far as the aggression goes, I mean, and Carlo did say I lean more towards Trump. That's true. And I'll tell you the exact day I leaned towards Trump, because up to that point, I was kind of indifferent to the candidates, but this was in 2016. Yeah, 2016. I was in Kuwait, and this is when Hillary was basically openly saying we should go to war with Russia and Syria. And I think if Hillary won, we absolutely would already be, and at the very least, an indirect war with Russia and Syria. We would have more troops than we have now, and they would actually be directly. I think we would have that World War III scenario would have happened 4 years earlier. And that's why I think Trump's not going to win, because Trump represented a 4-year break in that plan, because Ukraine, because the second Biden took office, they immediately started beating the war drums for Ukraine. So I think the war with Russia was because Trump was sitting there in that crucial spot, because there are certain things you can't override the president on. You have to get his blessing to a certain extent. So I think what we saw in January of 2022, 2020, 2021. I'm sorry. When Biden took office, that's what was planned for January of 2017. With Hillary. was going to go to war with Russia, but then with Trump sitting there,
they were going to pull the
wait.
trigger on Ukraine. They were going to precipitate.
They might have
Russian
pulled it in Syria.
response.
What happened to Ukraine might have ended up happening in Syria, because I mean, imagine if Hillary did her no-fly zone in Syria. You can't just start shooting down Russian planes. You can't do that without war with Russia, I think. So, you know, we have to look. I mean, what I ask everybody to do is just look at the scale of things. You know, which is worse, these domestic issues or World War III? Because in my mind, World War III is worse. And we get Kamala Harris. I think World War III is very likely. And again, I remind everyone that they just made selective service automatic. I don't think that was a decision that was made lightly. Why now?
It's just tough for me to think that they're suicidal and they're really going to pull the trigger on that. I'm still optimistic that they might not. But what do you think, Carlo?
I was just thinking this is also not an either-or situation, because frankly, there's little attention being paid to Ukraine. Obviously, with just simple artillery, primarily, and an occasional across Ukraine airstrike, the Russians are winning. Now, I'm addicted, it's stupid, but I'm addicted to these guys that show you the maps of the daily progress.
Yeah.
Now, it's not great progress, but and I don't know much about military strategy, but it's consistent progress. There are no pushbacks, almost literally, no pushbacks by the Ukrainians. So that's a dead letter item. So it really comes down to Israel. And I think Trump his son-in-law plans to build condominiums on the shoreline of Gaza. Then there's the Leviathan, which nobody seems to talk about, which if the Israelis could tap at all, would become a great fossil fuel power in the Western Asia. You guys want to talk about, slogan terms. Now we've gone from Middle East, which I've known my entire life, to Middle Asia. But
West Asia.
But I don't think these things can be kind of easily unraveled. I think either party could get us into World War III very quickly and very simply.
I think there's a big danger of Trump, going to war with Iran just based on his rhetoric and his actions, and his fealty he's given to Israel over the top. And so, it's always, the memes of the people who are always seeing everything as a Jewish plot, or that they say that Israel controls the United States. Imagine if they get Trump in power and then Trump ends up going to war with Iran. It's kind of to a degree you can see how it's proving what they've always said, what I've always rejected as being right. Wow, that is some serious power over the objection of the Democrats, ostensibly. But I know my statements are going to be picked apart, and so I'm trying to be very careful with how I say them.
Well,
but I don't put that past Trump. Getting into power and then initiating a war for Israel against Iran, that's not out of the realm of plausibility.
He does have that Israeli son-in-law that he gave his daughter to, and then Kamala also has an Israeli husband too. So it's kind of it's kind of amazing.
Oh, I didn't realize her billionaire husband was of Israeli citizenship.
Yes, he has an Israeli, and it's not just his grandfather from 200 years ago. He actually has an Israeli passport, apparently.
Interesting.
So he is dual citizen.
And Trump's daughter, converted to Judaism, obviously, and then her father-in-law is a big real estate investor in the West Bank and the occupied territories. So they do have so much in common.
Yeah.
So Dust saying some nice things. So guys, a decent conversation. I know we missed Ben and his contribution, but he'll hopefully be off assignment soon. But yeah, are you guys okay wrapping it up?
Yeah, it's a good stopping point, I think.
Yeah.
Our 100th episode in the bag. We will be back on Friday for episode 101. Thanks everyone for watching, and Dust, we're going to have you on soon to talk about these things in person. But thanks for your contributions via chat. Okay, we'll see you guys later. Bye.
Bye.